Well, there was an archaeologist that was digging in the Negev desert in Israel and came upon a casket containing a mummy. After examining it, he called the curator of a prestigious natural history museum. He said, "I've just discovered a 3,000-year-old mummy of a man who died of heart failure." The excited scientist exclaimed, to which the curator replied, "Bring him in. We'll check it out." So a week later, the amazed curator called the archaeologist. "You were right about the mummy's age and cause of death. How in the world did you know?" "Easy. There was a piece of paper in his hand that said 10,000 shekels on Goliath." We're going to learn more about that story as we go, I promise. Oh, you keep encouraging me, okay. So we're in the season for peace and nonviolence, as you've heard. And so last week was Random Acts of Kindness Week. So how'd you do? How'd you do extending kindness? And remember, we talked about if there was a person in your life that had really made a difference for you, that you were going to seek that person out. Did you seek that person out? Okay, so remember, I think I'm now going to call this hallway over here the happenings hallway. And so there's a bulletin board that's interactive out there, a small bulletin board, and it says, "Where did you extend kindness?" Would you fill out a sticky note after service, and just so we can just share in your joy together? That would be so great. Okay. All right. So, every week, and sometimes before, the week before, but this week I was like, what am I going to talk about this week? And it's a season for peace and nonviolence. And what came to me was the story of David and Goliath, which is very far from being nonviolent. Yeah, so I was struggling with it because here we are in the season for peace and nonviolence. But as I kept going inward, what I got was, let's go on this journey together, and let's see what it can mean for us today in expressing peace and nonviolence. So you ready? You want to go on this journey? Let's review the story, okay? So I'm going to tell this story. It's from 1 Samuel chapter 17, and so I'm going to go in and out of the biblical words and my narrative, okay, which you'll be able to tell. Yeah. So... Now the Philistines gathered their armies for battle. King Saul and the Israelites gathered and formed rank against the Philistines. The Philistines stood on the mountain on one side, and Israel stood on the mountain on the other side, with a valley in between them. And there came out from the camp of the Philistines a champion named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. And that's approximately 9 feet, 3 inches tall. Yeah. He had a helmet of bronze on his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail. And mail is a long defensive garment made of interlinked metal rings. You're getting this picture. Yeah. Made of, the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze, and that's 125 pounds approximately. He had greaves of bronze on his legs, protective leg armor, and a javelin of bronze slung between his shoulders. And the shaft of this spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron, approximately 40 pounds. And his shield bearer went before him. He stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why have you come up to draw up to battle? Am I not a Philistine, and are you not servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves, and let him come to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us." When Saul and all of Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. For 40 days the Philistine came forward and took his stand, morning and evening. So let me give you some background. The Philistines were an aggressive people who occupied part of southwest Palestine from about 1200 to 600 BCE. They were Israel's chief foes and had superior weapons of iron. And during the time of Samuel, this was before King Saul, they had actually captured the Ark of the Covenant. Now, the Ark of the Covenant was a big deal because in it contained the 2 stone tablets containing the 10 Commandments, which was the basis of the covenant between God and his people. So since this warring time, they had moved into the Israelites' territory and were greatly feared. Okay, so back to the story. So David was a shepherd, and he was the youngest of 8 sons, whose father was Jesse from Bethlehem in Judah. The 3 oldest sons had joined King Saul on the battlefield to fight the Philistines. Jesse was concerned about his sons, so he sent David to go bring them food and report back to him how they were doing. So David left his sheep tending and did what his father asked him to do. He arrived at the encampment as the army was going forth to the battle line, shouting the battle cry. He dropped off the supplies and went to greet his brothers. And as he was talking with them, he heard the giant Philistine Goliath deliver his threat once again. And he noticed how afraid everyone was. So David started asking some questions like, who does this big guy think he is? How does he think that he can defy the army of the living God? And what would be done for this person who brought this guy down? And David was told that whoever brought him down would find great favor with the king, and the king would sanction a marriage with his daughter and make his family free in Israel. It's pretty good stuff. But then David's oldest brother, Eliab, chimes in and says, in an angry way, "Why have you come down here? Who'd you leave the sheep with in the wilderness? I know you. You've only come down here to see the battle." David said, "What have I done now? It was only a question." Little sibling rivalry when we have it. But word got out to King Saul that David was ready to go to battle against the Philistine, so he sent for him. And David said to the king, "Your servant will go and fight this Philistine." And Saul said, "But you are just a boy, and this Philistine has been a warrior since he was a child." And David then proceeded to tell the king how he had wrangled with and slain lions and bears to protect his sheep, and that he would do the same thing with this Goliath character because he had defied the armies of the living God. And David said, "The Lord who saved me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear will save me from the hand of this Philistine." So Saul said to David, "Go, and may the Lord be with you." So Saul clothed David in armor and a coat of mail, along with a big bronze helmet. He also gave him a sword. Now, David was a little guy, and this garb was so heavy and cumbersome he couldn't even walk. So David said, "Look, man, I'm not used to this. This does not work for me." So he took the garb off, took his staff in his hand, and picked up 5 smooth stones and put them in his shepherd's bag in the pouch. His sling was in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine. Now here's the Bible version. When the Philistine grew near to meet David, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him. David put his hand in his bag, took out a stone, slung it, and struck the Philistine on his forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. So David prevailed over Goliath with a sling and a stone, striking down the Philistine and killing him. There was no sword in David's hand. Then David ran and stood over the Philistine. Then he grabbed a sword, drew it out of his sheath, and killed him. Then he cut off his head. Sorry. See, I told you it was not nonviolent. But we're going to get there. When the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. The troops of Israel and Judah rose up with a shout and pursued the Philistines and pushed them out of their territory. Okay, there's the story. You remember that story? Yeah, so hence the mummy with the 10 shekels on Goliath. Yeah, okay. Okay, so let's dive into the metaphysical meaning. And all the metaphysical meaning is we're just going beyond the literal. Okay, so the first step we're going to do is we're going to look at what the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary says about it. So David, metaphysically means divine love individualized in human consciousness. David represents love grounded in faith, wisdom, and strength. He was strong in his faith, and his love and wisdom informed his choices. Goliath represents dominant, aggressive, error ideas and thoughts run by the senses that parade in our minds prominently that we give power to. It's when we get stuck in our ego, in our intellect, and arrogance. The Israelites represent our spiritual process. They represent our desire to have illumined thoughts, yet need to be cultivated and disciplined in their knowing of what is true. And the Philistines represent that side of us that refuses to live in spiritual consciousness, but instead focuses on the outer sense world. And the stone is a divine idea. Isn't that fun? Okay, so now let's take this into our lives. Do you ever have days when you struggle from giving your power over to something that feels so much bigger than you? Do you let fear take you over because what's in front of you feels like a huge Goliath-size issue? Do you forget that your love and wisdom and strength individualized in human consciousness? Do you ever have days when people just can't see all that you are, or you yourself can't see all that you are, just like David's older brother? They just can't see your whole potential because they're holding you in the past. Who do you think you are? So see, these are opportunities, folks, for us to stand in our knowing of what we are, in our love, in our faith, to stand strong. Because what we are, the fullness of what we are as divine beings, is bigger than anything out here. See, David modeled love grounded strongly in faith and strength as the appearance of a huge obstacle stood in front of him. See, because to David, it wasn't the truth. To David, divine strength and power was the only reality. How many times do we give power to what is not true, forgetting how powerful we are? Forgetting that we can make a difference. Have you ever had an idea, a vision that people thought was just crazy or impossible, but you just knew it was yours to do, even in the midst of their projected fear, even in the midst of their angst and limited thinking? See, David in this story modeled saying yes in faith regardless of outer appearances. And he did it in his own unique way. So King Saul was going to, load him up with armor and a sword, and he's like, no, that's not mine. That's your way. I'm going to do it my way. Yeah, he didn't need that self-protection. He knew what was his to do. And notice where he aimed the first stone, right here. Yeah. Right in the middle of the forehead. The ego. Remember the ad, I should have had a V8? Where do they hit? Right here. Yeah, I should have gotten out of my head and followed my truth. Yeah, and one divine idea can take down a huge obstacle. Yeah. So, and then of course when he cut off his head, all that is, metaphysically, is we just have to cut off our reliance on living in our head. Yeah. We have to cut off our reliance on our intellect and instead go to our hearts, go to our wisdom, go to our knowing of what we know is true, and live from that. Elizabeth Sand Turner was the author of Let There Be Light. It's a classic unity book that metaphysically interprets the Old Testament, and she said this: in our own personal experience, Goliath represents any huge problem that looms before us for which we have no remedy in the outer. When we meet it in the consciousness of divine knowing, it is solved easily and quickly. So, this week, is there something in your life, something in the news that feels bigger than us, than you? I know I've felt that way in the last week. Seriously. And so this talk just resonated for me to remind myself that nothing in our outer world is greater than the truth of what we are, folks. Nothing. Nothing is bigger than our faith. Nothing is bigger than our wisdom. No obstacle, no limited thinking or perspective or fear around us is too great when we center our awareness in what we are. And when you confront an outer fear or doubt this week, I just invite you to think of David. Don't give power to the outer conversation, circumstance, limitation, but turn within and call forth your knowing. There's a parting perspective. When Goliath came against the Israelites, the soldiers all thought, he's so big, we can never kill him. David looked at the same giant and thought, he's so big, I can't miss. So, folks, we can't miss. We can't miss when we hold our knowing. We can't. Nothing is greater, although it might feel that way in our world right now. Nothing is greater than the divinity you are. And when we come together in like-minded community, there is nothing we can't do. So take a deep breath and let's affirm together, there is nothing outside of me that is bigger than what I am. I stand strong in this truth and do what is mine to do from great love and faith. I soar, and so it is.